Itt van még amit letekért.
Savage and brutally mean, the orcs
Na,
are
egy kis lassítás.
spreading out in an overwhelming green tide.
Nem tudok úgy ülni, hogy ne iszadjak szét mindenhogy.
These green-skinned brutes enjoy nothing more than a good crumpin, and their entire culture revolves around the vicious art of war. For an orc, conflicts can start small, with many a warboy finding great pleasure in squashing an arrogant grot, or brawling with their camp members over who gets the last mug of fungal beer. However, small squabbles are not where the true joy of battle can be found. Orcs will relish in the opportunity to fight in a large-scale battle, charging across the ruined and blasted landscapes to get stuck in with the boys and to chop away at whatever squishy foes they have found. In order to best instigate and initiate these conflicts, the orcs will gather themselves into a vast war-driven horde known as a war. This group will be so large that any war they cause will surely be of an apocalyptic scale, which will ravage and destroy entire star systems.
Hát nem tudom, van egy csomó bekért játék is.
Once the war has begun, there is little that can be brought to stop relentless and savage advance, as the orcs will set out across the stars, looting and tearing apart all who might foolishly stand in their way. The orcish instinct for war is innate to their very being. They have only ever known war, and will only ever seek it out. Conflict and battle is as vital to an orc as breathing air is to a human, and although an orc will not wither and die without a good fight, they will surely be irate and poised to jump at whatever unfortunate creature might pass by them. Even amidst an orc camp or settlement, there will be a constant fight for power. Orcs know that the biggest, greenest and meanest orc is surely the best, and so will brawl and fight each other to prove their strengths and rise to leadership amongst the clan. The orc who bests all others, crumps all his compatriots and claims the most teeth, is known as the war boss, and he is the de facto chief and ruler of his tribe, and it is only he who may direct the boys on their war path. To note on this, becoming a war boss is not a permanent title. Any other orc may fight and kill the previous war boss if they feel particularly mean and green that day, and if successful, may claim the title.
Majd talán, hogyha lesz HC hivatalosan, akkor talán lesz majd, de
a war boss will only have the support of his tribe for as long as he provides them with conflicts to engage in. A placid and cowardly war boss who does not lead his boys into battle will quickly be overthrown and killed by a more proactive orc who is more inclined to jump into a war. Within the majority of orc camps, there will be a constant squabble for the title of war boss, with some lasting for weeks and some for only minutes before they're overthrown and trampled back into line with the rest of the orc rabble. This power struggle tends to keep the orcs preoccupied with themselves. The tribe may venture out on raiding parties or get into little scraps with other groups of orcs or species native to the planet, but their aspirations are rarely higher than having a good fight or getting a good pot of teeth. However, this Goldilocks period of orc infighting does not last forever. Once a tribe grows large enough, it seems to reach some kind of critical mass where the simple bickering quarrels between boys is no longer satisfactory, and they crave a different scale of conflict. There are two leading theories on what may spark a war to emerge. Firstly, at times, a tribe may seemingly reach something akin to a subconscious agreement, where the orcs realize that their way of life is not conducive towards their own war-driven happiness, and so will band together and set out to find new opponents to fight and kill. This may be due to the orcs spending a prolonged period of time at peace, where a collective frustration and discomfort would have built up, leaving the boys with a craving for The second theory is that a war is sparked by a single orc who becomes emboldened by an overwhelming sense of leadership, causing him to rile up his fellow orcs into a state of warish fervor. This could
Ezeket
be
inkább úgy tudom
because the
elképzelni,
warboss is
hogy csinálnak
particularly
valamit, és
strong
mögötte
and
hallgatom.
inspires or forces his fellow orcs to follow his orders, as has been the case with the legendary Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka.
Ezzel nem vágja.
Or it could be he suffered a rather bad head injury and awoke with the voices of the orc deities Gork and Mork yelling in his ear to gather his tribe and set off into the galaxy for a good fight. In the early stages, the orcs can begin gathering in groups as small as a few dozen boys, but this will quickly snowball into a green tide, which may
És ez, hogy
swallow
most
the
megküldtetek
planet.
egy csomó.
In order to drum up the numbers, the war boss may lead his tribe to conquer other orc groups within the area, crumping their own respective bosses and rallying the remaining boys to his own cause. Alternatively, a
Ez
rather
a
crafty
children.
boss might call in a few favors with a mech, who will build a great effigy of orkiness to attract others on the planet to join in with the coming battles. Whatever the methods, word will quickly spread across a planet of this luminary war boss. Tribes from every corner of the world will descend upon this group.
Hát mit
with some
tudom én
seeking to
már?
take part in
Minden
In the
meg.
past, MMOs were
with
regarded.
others hoping to
Nem
kill the
tudom
war
már.
boss
Nem
and
tudom.
claim
Hát
the whole
annyi ilyen
world
izé
for
volt
themselves.
már, hogy nem tudom. Mit tudom én?
The war
Meg.
boss
Nem
will
tudom.
continue to swell his tribe with new members, all of whom are ready for the
11 hónapos
oncoming
videó.
war.
Nem tudom.
And as the tribe
Mikor kérted
grows,
ezt? Vagy küldted?
more and more orcs will hear of the commotion and will try to quickly join in, not wanting to be left out of all the fun. As more and more orcs join in, the original
Hát akkor nem
tribes
tudom,
are
Zsuzsi,
often
azt tudom,
sustained
milyen
the
hónap,
sheer
mi volt
volume of
11
boys
hónap
which are
ezelőtt.
trudging through it. The orcs will begin by expanding this into a shanty town, and then eventually into a sprawling
Ki a tökömet
complex of
érdekli,
orc
hogy
dwellings,
hogy
fighting
reagálok.
pits and squad
Mármint
homes,
lehet, hogy
giving
most
the
itt
boys a good
pár
place to
embert
prepare for
érdekel, de
the
alapvetően hát annyit nem, hogy így
This flood of
megérje
orcs
ez.
brings with it a great many boons and bonuses to the group. Innumerable mechs will inevitably become a part of this new society and will be quick to start tinkering and messing with whatever they can get their grubby green hands
Nem
on.
tudom.
The mechs will rapidly begin tearing down parts of the settlement, rebuilding them as advanced workshops where they will begin their disorganized work. Almost as soon as the mechs begin welding and hammering away, ramshackle vehicles will start to trundle out onto the streets, driven by boys inclined to do nothing
Csó, ez
but
is
go
27
fast.
perc,
They will gladly accept
ez még
modifications
10,
from the
ez
mechs,
is
will
17,
revel in
az is
attaching new
9.
rockets or more wheels to their creations. Some of the larger orcs may violently request that the mechs hurry up and build them a far more impressive piece of machinery to carry them into battle.
Na, azt várjuk,
The
mondjuk
streets
azt
soon
várjuk
become
sittesünk.
congested
Jó lenne,
with
hogyha aludná
gigantic
már,
battle
de
wagons
ezt várjuk.
equipped with massive artillery pieces and being able to fit a vast number of boys within who will drive across a battlefield, gleefully blasting away at their foes before leaping out and getting stuck into the fun themselves. Some of these mechs will inevitably form smaller tribes themselves, seeking to outdo each other with their bizarre mechanical creations.
De JJ, én
They
vagyok a
will even
főnök.
attract some of the other orcs who are more than willing to
Na,
volunteer.
emiatt most, amit JJ írt, az egészet felfüggesztjük és megyek.
To have some
Inkább.
piece of orcish machinery built around them. Some of the poorer mechs will have to make do with whatever scrap they can find, and as such, they will produce roughly cobbled together walkers known as killer cans, which will stumble out from the workshops, piloted by exasperated Gretchen, who long dreamed of a day where they would be the ones to squash something rather than being victimized yet again. These walking cans are dwarfed by Death Dreads, a larger scale version containing an orc even angrier than the Gretchen who simply wants to crush and kill as quickly as
Sőt,
possible.
jobban találtam ki.
These
Menjen az
mech
online.
groups will form small armies of walking murderous tin cans, sometimes leading several hundred constructs into battle. Each one of these clunking mechanical creations will be equipped with all manner of weaponry, from huge whirring saw blades to crushing hydraulic press units to gigantic rockets or ramshackle shooters. Eventually, some of the richer and more technical mechs may band together and decide that killer cans and Death Dreads
Most mi a baj
are not
ezzel?
fulfilling their need to build, and they will begin to work on a masterpiece. Once ready, huge, hulking, walking fortresses such as Stompers or Gargants will crash out from a workshop having been built too big to be sustained in such a meager building. These titans will trample their way through the settlement, piloted by dozens of orcs and hundreds of Gretchen.
Ez is rég volt már, volt egy csomó videó, mondjuk azokat megnéztük, de most küldtetek még párat, úgyhogy...
to craters of smouldering ash. For the orcs who are less technical and more fighty, they will
Hát
form
bazdmeg, egy
their own
rákos, az
groups
hol van
within
Skyler?
the greater
Hol van Skyler? Na hol van?
And as
Honnan
such,
tudjam?
orcs who are inclined to a certain way of war will find each other, and they will form their own hierarchy before setting themselves
Hát
up.
azt amikor amikor nem nyaralt, akkor hol volt?
Has been observed in almost every wow encountered, and it is known as the cult of speed. This is formed of orcs who simply love to go fast more than anything else. They will be closely affiliated with the mechs, who, as previously discussed, will gladly augment their buggies and bikes with huge engines or afterburners to push them into new realms of speed. These orcs will paint everything they own red, because, as any orc knows, red makes it go faster. Their vehicles will be red to make them as speedy as possible. Their clothes will be red, so they can go faster than any other orc. And even their bullets will be painted red, so that they can be shot faster. Some of the speed freaks, who are unsatisfied by how slowly one can move on the ground, may request a fighter jet be built for them. The mechs will come together, have a big think on how to make such a contraption, and with a spark of genius will essentially bolt a set of wings onto an intercontinental ballistic missile, remove the warhead, and strap a seat onto the mechanical model of perfection. Once the speed freak lays eyes upon this magnum opus of orkiness, this showpiece of mechanical engineering, this masterstroke of ingenuity, he may shed a single tear of happiness before leaping onto the craft and launching himself into the air, diving and corkscrewing around, much to the envy of the relatively slow land-dwelling orcs below him. Some of the more anarchic orcs will also group up to form Stormboy tribes. The word anarchic is used very loosely here, for to an orc, their idea of anarchy is to adhere to strict rules and training regiments in a manner more closely resembling a human military unit rather than a squad of orcs. The Stormboys will have a regular schedule, with drilling and marching practice being performed every day, and orcish songs being chanted all the while. Do not assume that because these orcs are disciplined that they are not certifiably insane. All this discipline leads them to is for them to strap a gigantic rocket onto their back, allowing them to careen and soar across the skies into battle, plunging into a fight faster than their less regimented kin. Some of the more unstable orcs, who would have been twitching ever more frequently since the war started to form, will find their place amongst the weird boy covens. These psychically sensitive orcs are emboldened by the strengthening surge of energy caused by the orc gathering, and will utilize the communal green energy to conjure forth magics and powers against their enemies. They can also use their psychic skills to throw other orcs across a battlefield towards the front line, allowing them to get stuck into combat, hacking and chopping away at the poor sods who just witnessed 100 orcs be tossed into them with reckless abandon. With the orcs now numbering in the millions, and their forces accompanied by thousands of vehicles and walkers, they can finally begin their war. The war boss in charge will drum up the orcs into a fervour of battle, using their anticipation for war as the key to getting them fired up into a frenzy, at which point they will all bellow out a deafening wah, which will echo across a planet and signal the orcs to charge. The green tide will flow out from their shanty settlements to cover the entire world. Native populations will be quickly subdued by the oncoming warpath, being killed or enslaved by the rampant horde of orcs. Any industrial settlements captured will be either torn down for parts or repurposed into building even more mechanical wonders for the horde, much to the delight of the mechs. The deluge of destruction will continue to spread across the planet, destroying, capturing and conquering all who were unfortunate enough to find themselves at the mercy of the orcs.
Ezek az orkok
Smoke
nagyon
from
szeretnek
thousands of
robbantgatni.
engines will plume into the skies, proving to be an ominous signal of the approaching orc tide. The horizons will be pocked with the silhouettes of massive stompers and gargants, awkwardly but violently crashing their way closer to the planet's defenders. Dozens of fighter jets will be seen banking and twirling through the skies, leaving trails of thick black
Goblin
smoke behind
signals.
them before dive bombing towards the ground, launching
Or whatever.
a huge array of ordnance down onto the battlefield.
Valószínűleg úgy hagytam a
Immensely
Beast
large
for Old
armies
Francis
of
most
orc boys
eszembe.
charge across the planet's surface,
Or whatever.
interspaced by racing attack bikes and buggies, carrying even more orcs towards the front lines. Huge banners and icons are carried by the tide, signifying their allegiance to the war boss and to their own minor tribes. The tide is so immense that the plumes of dust and smoke can be seen from space, as a wave of grim death and destruction enveloping the planet. Some horrified defenders may flee the world on escape craft, hoping to save their own lives and perhaps warn others of what has transpired, but for most they will be swallowed up by the green tide. As the orcs finally come full circle and realize that they have crumped everything worth crumping, they will turn to their war boss for direction. For if he cannot find anyone else to kill, then fighting him may be the next best thing. A clever,
Most kértetek, most lett bekérve
will
vagy
realize that his
4.
demise will soon come if he does not redirect the horde. So he will summon up
Discordra kell küldeni a
and
reakciószobába.
instruct them to cobble together a fleet of starships large enough to carry them off-world and into other battles. Most of the mechs will agree and will start work on the ships, but some will ponder if there is a quicker way and will begin to build vast teleporter pads where the orcs may step on and supposedly warp to the best battlefields in the galaxy. Whatever the method, the Horde is poised to leave the world, and with the Warboss at its head, the orcs will blast their way through the stars, gathering more and more boys to their cause, growing into an unstoppable green and
De az
orky
gyűrűkurás
force,
Ákos.
which will
Azt lehet,
carve
hogy szereted a
apart the
gyűrűkurát.
galaxy in its mighty Wah.
Na.
Of Kings is ended. The Witch King has killed the last king of Gondor, and the time of the ruling stewards has begun. Over the next 1,000 years, they would lead Gondor through further war, but also alliances with other men and a wizard. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we continue the history of Gondor.
Ákos,
After the childless
én
King
szerintem Ákos nem a
Eärendil is
legnagyobb
killed by the Witch King in Minas
gyűrűkura
Morgul, it is
rajongó.
believed the line of Anarion has failed. No one with any tangential claim to the throne would come forward, for no one wanted to risk another kin strife. At this time, Gondor is far from its previous heights, and another kin strife would likely have destroyed the realm entirely. Thus, the rule of Gondor passes to the line of the stewards. Mardil Voronwe, the steward who attempted to dissuade Eärnur from marching to face the Witch King, becomes the first of these ruling stewards in 2050 of the Third Age. As explained in last week's video, the stewards were said to rule until the king returns, for they had no proof that Eärnur was indeed dead. Out of respect for the king's position, the stewards would never sit on the throne of Gondor, but in their chair of black stone placed below it. They would also never wear a crown, but simply hold a white rod, a symbol of their position. Upon being sworn in, each steward pledged to hold rod and rule in the name of the king until he shall return. While certainly respected, it is not believed the latter portion of this pledge will ever come to fruition. There were none in Gondor descended from Isildur's direct line, and by this time the northern realm of Arnor was wiped out, the sole remnant being the relatively small group of Dunedain Rangers. The rule of the stewards would actually begin rather well. Mardil is said to have ruled with a steady hand, which is how he earns the moniker Voronwe, meaning the steadfast. And fortunately for his descendants, their rule would coincide with the period of time known as the Watchful Peace. During Mardil's rule, in 2063 of the Third Age, the wizard Gandalf the Grey went to Dol Guldur to investigate the shadow growing there. Not ready to reveal himself, this necromancer flees, and for nearly 400 years, Gondor and much of Middle-earth would have peace. While Sauron goes to the east, where he would work to corrupt the men of that land, his Nazgul look inward. Rather than plan attacks, they would instead prepare for Sauron's return, giving Gondor a respite from war. However, Gondor would use this opportunity to strengthen its borders with Mordor and Minas Morgul. Hador, the seventh ruling steward, is recorded as the last of his line to have a lifespan of a Dunedain, living to 150 years. At this point, the blood of Numenor waned, and the lifespan of the stewards would shorten closer to that of normal men. The Watchful Peace comes to an end in 2460 of the Third Age, during the rule of Denethor I, not to be confused with Denethor II, who we'll meet nearly 500 years later. 15 years after Sauron returns to Dol Guldur, a new menace would be unveiled, the Uruk-hai. Unbeknownst to their enemies, the lords of Minas Morgul had bred this new race of orc. Faster, larger, stronger, and smarter than typical orcs,
Smarter.
the Uruk-hai could travel in daylight without being weakened. They are unleashed from Mordor and conquer the lands of Ithilien and sack the city of Osgiliath. Denethor's son, Boromir, leads the Gondorian forces in driving Uruks out of Osgiliath, reclaiming the once great capital. However, this would be the final blow to the city. Already damaged and depopulated starting with the earlier Kinstrife, Osgiliath is completely abandoned after the attack by the Uruk-hai. Boromir would succeed his father as steward in 2477 of the Third Age, and while he had previously won back Osgiliath, the steward would have to fight several campaigns to win back the lands of Ithilien from the orcs. While he would eventually win back the lands of Gondor, Ithilien would remain depopulated, and during the war he receives a Morgul wound. Despite his strength, which was great, Boromir would become shrunken with pain and die just 12 years into his rule. The rule of Gondor passes to Boromir's son, Cirion, who would become one of the realm's most famous stewards. He takes leadership of a kingdom where the corsairs of Umbar have begun raiding the coasts once more. Ithilien, the land bordering its closest enemy, is deserted, and their northern province of Kalinarthon is almost completely depopulated. Between Kalinarthon and the forts along the Anduin having been long abandoned, Kirion's primary concern is invasion from the north.
Most
He
már
sends out spies so that
visszasírja.
he may be informed
Visszasírja a
of any
kontyos.
coming threats, and his men return with dire news. A new group of Easterlings has emerged, the Balkoth. Likely descended from the Wainriders, the Balkoth were under the shadow of Dol Guldur, and using a large number of wagons, they were making their way westward. In the spring of 2509, Cirion receives word that hosts of these men are mustering along the southern border of Mirkwood, preparing to invade Gondor. Desperate for aid, Cirion sends out 6 volunteer riders to seek out their old allies, the Eothai, from the far north. Of the 6 riders, only one would survive the 950-mile journey. Borondir delivers the Red Arrow, a symbol of the dire circumstances and a call for aid to King Eorl the Young. Knowing the chances of word reaching the Eotheid were slim, and not knowing how they would respond, Cirion musters as great a force as he is able. He personally leads the army north to meet this new foe. However, the Balkoth cross the river Anduin and overpower the Gondorians, driving them north over the Limelight River. A bad situation gets worse as orcs descend from the Misty Mountains, pinning Cirion against the Anduin. In this moment when hope was lost, there was a sudden sounding of horns. The riders of Eorl had come. The Eotheid turned the tide of battle, driving the enemies away and pursuing the Balkoth across the fields of Kalinarthon. 3 months later, Eorl comes to the Mering Stream at the request of Cirion. Since the Battle of the Field of Celebrant, Cirion had cleared the path to Amon Anwar. Cirion offers Eorl all the lands of Kalinarthon and for their people to live in perpetual alliance with one another. Eorl accepts, and their two parties ascend the hill, where Cirion reveals the secret tomb of Elendil. With his own son Halas, two counselors of Gondor, and the Prince of Dol Amroth as witnesses, Cirion pledges his bond with Eorl and his people. In response, Eorl pledges an oath of his own. Hear now all peoples who bow not to the shadow in the east. By the gift of the Lord of the Mundburg, we will come to dwell in the land that he names Calenarthon. And therefore I vow in my own name, and on behalf of the Eotheid of the north, that between us and the great people of the west, there shall be friendship forever. Their enemies shall be our enemies. Their need shall be our need. And whatsoever evil, or threat, or assault may come upon them, we will aid them to the utmost end of our strength. This vow shall descend to my heirs, all such as may come after me in our new land, and let them keep it in faith unbroken, lest the shadow fall upon them, and they become accursed. Cirion then made answer. Standing to his full height, he laid his hand upon the tomb, and in his right hand held up the white wand of the stewards, and spoke words that filled those who heard them with awe. For as he stood up, the sun went down in flame in the west, and his white robe seemed to be on fire. And after he had vowed that Gondor should be bound by a like bond of friendship and aid in all need, he lifted up his voice and said, "This oath shall stand in memory of the glory of the land of the star, and of the faith of Elendil the faithful, in the keeping of those who sit upon the thrones of the west, and of the one who is above all thrones, forever." Invoking the name of Iluvatar himself, such an oath had not been heard in Middle-earth since Elendil himself swore an allegiance with Gil-galad to form the last alliance of elves and men. Thus, Eorl becomes the first ruler of a new kingdom, the kingdom of Rohan, ever after in alliance with the men of Gondor. The names Rohan and Rohirrim being devised by Cirion's son, Halas. With Amon Anwar no longer making the midpoint of Gondor, Cirion removes the tomb of Elendil and has it placed in the Hallows of Rath Dinin in Minas Tirith. The following 200 years would largely be peaceful ones for Gondor. Between 2628 and 2655, during the rule of Belecthor I, we are told the Corsairs of Umbar once again become a threat to Gondor, though no specific battles or events are recorded. During the rule of Ecthelion I, the steward has the White Tower rebuilt in Minas Tirith. Standing 300 feet tall, the Great Tower shone like a spike of crystals, pearl, and silver. It would ever after be known as the White Tower of Ecthelion. The oath between Gondor and Rohan would be called upon multiple times over the coming centuries, though it would not always be answered. In 2710 of the Third Age, King Deor of Rohan would request the aid of Steward Elgamoth when Dunlending seized control of the Ring of Isengard. However, this came in a period of renewed war with the orcs, making Gondor unable to answer the call. Elgamoth's son Beren would spend much of his rule fighting the Corsairs of Umbar. During the long winter of 2758 to 2759, Gondor is assailed by 3 great fleets from Umbar and Harad, along the Gondorian coast as far north as the mouth of Isen. The northernmost of these forces joins with the Dunlendings in attacking King Helm Hammerhand's Rohan. Both kingdoms under attack, neither Gondor nor Rohan could assist the other for a long while. However, with spring on the horizon, Beren's son Baragon defeats the invading Corsairs and Haradrim. Thus, Gondor is finally able to send aid to Rohan, fulfilling the oath. Both Gondor and Rohan would survive these attacks, though Rohan's capital of Edoras was under enemy control for much of the winter. In the aftermath, Gondor is visited by one of the Astari. The wizard Saruman comes to Beren and requests permission to dwell in Isengard. Beren gladly agrees to having a wizard ally on the northern border of Rohan and gives him the key of Orthanc. Saruman by this time had already been seeking his own benefit, having researched much of the Rings of Power and deducing that one of the Palantiri remained in Orthanc. During the rule of Beren's son, Baragond, Gondor would once again be troubled by orcs. However, these orcs were not from Mordor. Instead, they were orcs fleeing the Battle of Azanabulzar, the climactic fight in the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. They take up residence in the White Mountains, and many battles would occur between men and orcs before the latter are destroyed. Still, Baragon's rule is largely a positive one, as Gondor begins to recover some of its strength. With the blood of Numenor still dwindling in the line of the stewards, Baragon's son Belecthor II is the last to live to 100 years old. Upon his death, the White Tree of Gondor also dies. However, the people of Gondor would leave it standing until the king comes. In 2882, Turin II becomes the 23rd ruling steward of Gondor and would do much to secure the future of his realm. Ithilien was further deserted by his people due to invasions of orcs, but Turin II would not forsake these lands. He builds secret refuges for his soldiers in Ithilien so that they could combat this threat. The longest guarded and manned of these outposts was Henneth Annwn, the very cave Faramir would take Frodo and Sam over 130 years later. But the greatest threat during Turin II's rule would come from the south. Ever since the Kinstrife, the lands of Horondor, also known as South Gondor, were a debated land between the Corsairs of Umbar and the Kingdom of Gondor. By the time of Turin II,
Sziasztok,
the
Gyűrűk élvezők.
occupied South Gondor, and from there, in 2885, they would launch an invasion of Ithilien with great force. Fortunately, King Folkwine of Rohan would fulfill the Oath of Eorl and sends many Rohirrim to Gondor. Thanks to the assistance of Theoden's great-grandfather, Gondor succeeds in defeating the Haradrim. Still, with this invasion, Gondor completely withdraws its people from Ithilien. The only ones remaining in the realm are the Rangers of Ithilien, soldiers left to harass the forces of their enemy as they could. Around 2900 of the Third Age, Turin II would also refortify the river island of Caer Andros to protect Gondor from the north. The rule of Turin's son Turgon would be largely peaceful, but for one notable occurrence. In 2951, 10 years after being driven from Dol Guldur by the White Council, Sauron declares himself openly in Mordor and begins rebuilding Barad-dûr. Just 2 years later, Turgon's son Ecthelion II becomes the 25th ruling steward of Gondor. Ecthelion II is known for his wisdom and used all his power to strengthen Gondor in the face of a resurgent Sauron. He would strengthen both the haven of Pelargir and Caer Andros. He would encourage worthy men from both within Gondor and without to enter into his service in exchange for ranks and reward. One stranger who comes into the steward's service is a man named Thorongil, who had previously served King Thengel of Rohan. Ecthelion grew to love Thorongil above all others, possibly even his own son, Denethor II. Denethor grows bitter toward Thorongil, and much of their council was in opposition. Thorongil advised Ecthelion to not trust Saruman in Isengard, but to instead turn to Gandalf the Grey. Thorongil advises the steward that the Corsairs of Umbar, the long-held enemies of Gondor, would prove a great threat to the southern fiefdoms if Sauron were to turn to open war. Ecthelion permits Thorongil to launch a surprise attack on the haven of Umbar, which severely damages the Corsair fleet. Thorongil could have then returned to Minas Tirith with great honor, but instead sends a farewell message to Ecthelion, for other tasks now called him. For Thorongil would indeed return to Minas Tirith nearly 40 years later, as this descendant of both Isildur and Anarion would return under his rightful name, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. For the final stage in Gondor's history, which we will cover next week, will be defined by the rules of Denethor and Aragorn, the War of the Ring, and the dawn of the Fourth Age. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom de Bombadil Knight.
Na jó, köszönjük. Ez pedig, ezt letekérte, vagy küldte. Aha, sem meg, aha. Na tessék, csak beszélni kellett róla a Skylerről,
Sziasztok, hello.
látod? Kösz szépen, Skyler. Csak beszélni kellett róla, hogy hol, de hol van Sky, de hol van?
Avez-vous entendu la nouvelle? C'est vraiment en train de se passer. Un armistice signé ce matin. La guerre se terminera à 11h.
Ah, c'est pas sérieux.
Il y aura de la soupe! De la soupe chaude!
Ezek a videók általában arra jók, nem, hogy mennyire az így, úgy alapvetően így rossz a háború. Vagy hát nem tudom ez miről szól, de hogy már hogy mi lesz kihozva ennek a lényegének.
Donc, pour l'amour de Dieu, ne vous faites pas tuer, hein? Hey, hey, c'est fini. La guerre se terminera à 11h. Il y aura de la soupe chaude pour nous tous. On rentre à la maison. Alors, ne vous faites pas tuer, hein? Il y aura de la soupe.
Wenn der Krieg vorbei ist, wird alles anders.
Alles endet, was beginnt. Csak hát.
Ezek erről Dark jutott eszembe. Ahogy beszélt.
Ich freue mich nur auf eins. Meine geliebte Imelda.
Sie ist dein Freund? Sieht ja aus wie meine Großmutter.
Ja.
Ich sag dir, worauf ich mich freue. Frisches Bettzeug.
Was zum Teufel? Halt! Marktplatz! Marktplatz! Halt! Geht zurück! Stopp! Der Krieg ist vorbei! Zurück! Zurück!
De mit csinál?
Du fou. Get down!
Les Allemands, ils sont partis. Vous vous joindrez à nous. La guerre se termine à 11h.
Kimegy, bassz meg, kimegy. Miért mentek ki? Na, pont ennyi értelme van a háborúnak, bazd meg. Semmi. Nem láttam volna. Ez volt a videó. Na már itt van elvileg JJ-nek a két évvel ezelőtt bekért videója, ami elvileg a... Lolos MMO-ról szól.
Everyone knew MMOs had the power to create cult following, but also everyone knew making MMOs was hard. On average, an MMO has to spend at least 6 years in the baking before it can get anywhere near being good. But that didn't stop companies from jumping onto the bandwagon anyway. And soon we could see dozens of new MMOs, all releasing in 2008. All being called the WoW Killers. Spoiler alert, none of them did that. And unfortunately, we can feel the ripple effects even now. It got to a point where every time a new MMO is announced, we all think the same thing.
Hát nem ez, de hogy igen. Ez a videó
when you're
szól.
working on an MMO, you have to respect 3 pillars. Gameplay is king, social interactions matter, and the world setting is important. When Riot announced their MMO, it became clear that 2 of the pillars are being respected, and the third one is already done. When it comes to the gameplay, it is currently in the hands of Ghostcrawler, someone who's been working on WoW during its best times, and someone who got a reputation for hating boomkins and loving mages. When it comes to the social interactions, it is a dance between the developers and the players. A dev can guide players towards social interactions.
No olyan Twixer, hogyha jön ez a riótos MMO-szű lesz, akkor változ WoW-ról, mi?
After that, the players usually find their own fun inside the MMO. From that point on, the devs should do everything in their power to support the players having fun in their own way. And finally, when it comes to the world of an MMO, in Riot's case, it's done. And it's been finished for quite a few years now. In fact, the world of Riot's MMO is in such a good state. They already have the continents, the zones, the cultures, and the races. And to a lesser degree, every zone already has its own storyline. Now, of course, unless you follow the lore of League of Legends, you wouldn't know about this. And that's why I decided to make this video. I want to show you all the zones we are going to see in the MMO
Egyébként
and
az
what
utóbbi
sorts of
kettő, amit
quests we are
írtálok
going
is
to do
mennek
there.
még most is.
So, for the purpose of this video, I will assume you have no idea what League of Legends is about. You have no idea what the universe is about, but you like MMOs, your hairline is receding, and you have a crippling fear of Nintendo 64 controllers. To which I might add, why do you think I'm wearing hats? But now, without further ado, let's have a look at all the zones in Riot's MMO.
A Valorant már.
This is Runeterra, the world of League of Legends.
Maga a világa
Right
megvan.
now, the
Értem?
world is separated into 10
A
main
lolosok
regions.
ezeket
But these
ismerik.
10 regions don't
Már
cover
akik
all the
ismerik
land on the
nyilván.
map, so there are some mini-zones in between them. And the lore already revealed that there is gonna be another continent further to the east. That definitely sounds like a future expansion to me. In fact, it would be foolish
Jó,
to
hát
release
akkor nem
all
fognak,
of
bazd
these
meg.
regions
Aztán
at
nagyon
all.
érted.
You can easily turn half of these into separate expansions. And because a lot of people already know and love these regions, the hype behind these expansions would be big.
Jó, a
With
bobozzá,
that
hát
said, I
na,
know a
az a
lot of
bobozzá
you would
szeretnék
like to
bobozzá,
play
de
as
azért nem kell
Shuriken
már azt mondani, hogy
or
ezt nem fogják játszani.
Ionians. And now you may be cursing me for suggesting that these would be expansions. But the lore can justify giving you these nations as playable races without having their regions. I'll show you how Riot can pull this off in a bit. First, let's talk about the regions Riot's MMO has to start with. The Northern Continent. This entire continent is called Valoran. Not Valorant, Valoran. And this is where the absolute core of this world is. The two main regions
Igen,
here
Francis,
are
hagyd legyen már egy
Demacia
kis bilge
and
volt,
Noxus,
bilge
like
váltani
the two big
kalóz.
rivals equivalent to the Horde and the Alliance. While I would like to say that Demacia is your classic
De mi
normie
köze a...
human region,
Mi köze...
it's not really
Elküldöm.
true. Runeterra
Mi köze a
doesn't really have
Diablónak a
normal
Riótos
place. There is
MMO-hoz?
something cool
Ezt nem
happening in
értem.
every region. And Demacia has racism. Okay, maybe not racism, because Demacia doesn't mind Yordles or Minotaurs, but they really hate mages. That's because in the past, their rivals almost annihilated half of the world using magic. And so, Demacia was built inside a magic-absorbing forest. Therefore, Demacia is a really cool place where you can hide from magic. When it comes to the visuals of the zone, you can see a lot of lush fields, it is surrounded by mountains, but the iconic part of Demacia are the buildings.
Nincs
They are
köze.
made of petricite, which is a combination of stone and the magic-absorbing wood.
De miről
Because
beszélsz?
these
Hát
ancient
játsszák, én nem
magic-absorbing trees
értem.
were grey, all the buildings
Tehát
have a
nem,
marble-like
nincs, nem
appearance.
logikus, amit
And
mondasz,
yes,
hát
what
játsszák.
material they are using, all the buildings
Vagy
in
mit nem
Demacia
játszanak?
also absorb magic. So should a mage visit this region, let's just say it's gonna be a painful experience. On
Hogy
top of
melyiket
this,
nem
let's not
játsszák?
forget
Nem
that
értem, mert
Demacians
ez
can
nem így van,
weaponize
ahogy
petricite.
írjátok.
They can turn it into petricite steel, which gives you your classic anti-magic weapons, and you can sculpt petricite constructs which wake up after
De
absorbing
milyen...
magic.
mit-
Simply
Valaki,
said,
valaki
these guys
valamit
just really
csináljon
don't
Matrix-szeret.
like magic.
Basz meg,
The
gyerek, az...
irony is, they've been absorbing it for years now. And this is where
Nem nagy a
the story
pulzusom, de nagyobb, mint az IQ, amit itt
You
most
see,
a
the
cseten
Demacians are so afraid
előad.
of magic, they founded the Mage Seeker Order. This is an order of people who hunt mages, they throw them in the prison, and they torture them until their body gives up on magic. So yes, being a mage is a crime in Demacia. The thing is, people still get naturally born with magical abilities. You can't stop it from happening. So not only are there mages hiding in the royal court, right now there is a mage civil war
A Legion
happening
TD
in
2
Demacia,
az alapból
where
egy niche
mages and
játék.
people who don't hate mages
Egyébként
rise up to
a
fight
Legion
for moral
TD-t azt mai
rights.
napig játsszák
So should we
a
do
Warcraft
some quests in
3-on
this
belül,
zone?
mint
This
egy
is
modot.
gonna be the core story.
Skyler.
Mages
De
trying to
mi köze
overthrow
ennek a
racist
hasonlításnak
leadership following
a
all
Battle.net-en az,
So
hogy
the main enemy
az, hogy
NPCs
nem
might
is
be
értem.
mages and witches.
Tehát a Diablót
But I
azt nem...
know what you're thinking
A
now.
Diablót azt nem
And
pár
don't
ezren játsz.
worry.
Nincs
There
is
will
olyan
be plenty
Battle...
of
Nincs is
wars
olyan
to
bizonyos
kill
játék, amit
here
csak
too.
pár ezren
Or at least
játszanak. Én
there
nem
are
is
loads
értem.
of
A
wolves
Diablót
here,
nagyon
as
sokan
well
játszák.
as
Még a
stacks.
3-at is nagyon sokan
And we can't
játszották.
forget the iconic
Pedig az már
Nazi
tényleg
relics. But further to the south, we might find
Idézőjelben
some
dead volt.
great beasts, tiny woolly
Talán még
elephants,
most is
and
játsszák.
yes, of course, in the Argent Mountains there are also dragons.
De nincsen baj Trixel, nem azt mondom, csak hogy, tehát, hogy nem is értettem, mit
But
akar
that's about
mondani.
it for Demacia.
Játsszák.
Fun fact,
Arra.
the capital city of Demacia is called the Great City of Demacia. Sounds dumb, but Runeterra was
Hát
not
vagy
the
nem
first
csak azok,
one to do
akik...
this.
Hát most egy csomó
But
olyan van,
thankfully the other
akit
regions
érdekel a
are a bit
lónak a
more
világa,
creative with their
nem
names.
lolozni
So
akar,
now,
simán
let's
jó
move
ez
away from the
érted.
normie region and let's have a look at the badass region.
De hát nem Dead
Noxus.
Game egyik sem, amit írt.
If you're planning on playing a warrior with
maximum
oversized
a
weapons
hype
and
Dead
overcompensating lush hair,
De a hype-ot
this is the region for you.
az nem így
This
működik, ahogy ő
place actually
mondja.
has a long and badass history, but we really don't have the time to explain it now. So just know that originally it was built by the most badass warrior in the history of Runeterra.
Az, hogy meddig tart a hype a játék körül, azt nehéz megmondani, főleg még úgy, hogy nem is tudunk semmit róla.
So he just became the god of the underworld. When this guy lived, he built the Immortal Bastion, which is
abból kiindul, hogy mennyi LoL játékos van, és ez a játék a LoL világára épül, abból kiindulva, ennek nagyon nagy lesz a hype-ja.
That's a future raid boss. Anyway, the Immortal Bastion is the capital city of the Noxian Empire,
Legalábbis ez a videó arról
Noxus being
szól,
one of the most brutal nations in Runeterra. It is brutal because the nation is surrounded by rocky earth. It is hard to grow plants here. So Noxians are forced into conquering surrounding land for resources to survive.
Az, hogy mekkora a hype, attól még lehet szar a játék. A szar a játék, lehet, hogy gyorsan meghal a hype, és nem lesz a game. Ez lehetőség. Ezt nem tudjuk megmondani, nyilván csak spekulálni lehet, hogy a Riot a sok játékot nem csinált, amit csinált, az abban benne voltak elég keményen, rendesen értettek ahhoz, amit csinálnak. Úgyhogy ebből azt lehet spekulálni, hogy jó lesz. A hype az biztos, hogy nagy lesz. Ha jó a játék, akkor meg tovább tart.
And that's because Noxus values strength above all, and rulers tend to not be good fighters. This is what you can see in the After Victory cinematic. They kill the king because he was weak and let everyone else join them. Fun fact, conquering nations is so iconic for Noxus they have their own saying. Kill them until they are family. So when it comes to the quests in Noxus, it is most likely going to be helping the Empire expand its territory. Although this region has its own unique enemies too. Inside the Immortal Bastion there is a cult known as the Black Rose. This cult is connected to the darkest of magics. So be ready to fight Hemomancers, witches, demons, and the Grey Legion, which is an army of soldiers revived with blood magic to fight for the Empire again.
Igen, és akár azokat is érdekelheti egy ilyen játék, aminek hatalmas világa van, és azért most megtálltam. De például azért is jó egy ilyen, amint, tehát hogy nem is feltétlen kell a játéknak annyira nagyon jónak lenni, hogyha a világ is nagyon jó, mert alapvetően az elmúlnak is az is lenne az értelme, vagy az is lehet az értelme, hogy valaki csak elszűszmötöl a világban, mert annyira jó. Felfedezgeti, hogy mi van Demáciában, érted, mi történt a izével, mi van amögött, elmegy ide, elmegy oda, felfedezget, questezget, akármit csinál. Hát igen, de az a lényeg, hogy jól érzi magát a világ, jól érzi magát az egészen belül. Mert szerintem nincs olyan információ. Mert ez úgymond, ez egy olyan új dolog, amit így felfedezgethetnek az emberek. Ehhez mögött így nem nagyon van még úgy dolog, amit már így letettek, de amúgy valószínűleg van, hogyha utána jön az ember. De például a WoW-nak már ott már nagyon-nagyon sok évnyi tartalom van mögötte. Itt viszont a LoL-lal, meg a mögötti lore-ral már lefektették, de még nincs az, hogy te majd bemész valami játékba, és akkor mögé mész. És például más MMO-k ezt például nem tudták, vagy nem nagyon tudták megcsinálni. Most mit tudom én, New World mögött így mi a tökön van? Hát ott most mik vannak ott, egy lófasz. Hát most már lehet, hogy azért fogozik, de amikor a klasszik WoW először kijött, akkor szerintem mindenki, aki élvezte, ott elszöszmötölt és elnézegette a dolgokat, és elmászkált egész nap a világba. Most már az egy másik dolog, hogy most már annyira nem, tehát nincs is ilyen, mert mindenki, mit tudom én, mindenki menni akar előre, de ennek úgymond a világát nyilván föl akarod fedezni majd, vagy azok legalábbis, akiket érdekel. Nyilván olyan játékosok mindig lesznek, akik ezt pusolni akarják, és idézőjelben speedrunolni, hogy mit tudom én, végig rohanni és a legvégső contentet csinálni, de szerintem azoknak is ettől függetlenül jó lehet, hogyha a világban sok minden van meg a sztoriban. Ja.
While Noxus and Demacia are the main rivals here, both of them are also constantly repelling raids from the north. So now, let's have a look at the Freljord. Just like pretty much any region on Runeterra, Freljord has a long history. But for the purpose of this video, just know that the maddening old gods known as the Watchers of the Void, who want to devour the entire reality only because it keeps waking them up, once tried to breach into reality here. They almost succeeded because they tricked the
Ja, amúgy
Ice
köszi
Witch
Twixer a
Lissandra into
donatet.
helping
Szedd már le
them.
Dunk Csöves, ezt nem
Fortunately, she
olvasta be.
realized how wrong she was,
Ez volt
and
a
she managed to
donate
freeze
Twixertől.
half of the
2 euró,
kingdom
köszönöm.
with the Watchers still beneath them. So these days, the Ice Witch is the only person holding back the end of reality by keeping the Watchers frozen. So at some point in the future, you bet one of these woken up frozen Watchers is gonna be a raid boss. Now, when it comes to the NPCs, this is where things get diverse. First of all, remember that the Freljord is brutally cruel. Everything is frozen, and survival is everything. So the first enemy here would be the wildlife. From Rimefangs to Yetis to Druvasks to Elnuks to Mammoths to the worst of them all, Poros. Next we are going to fight the Freljordians themselves. There are 3 main tribes here. The Avarosans, who are quite peaceful, the Wintersclaw, who are quite brutal, and the Frostguard, Lissandra's followers who hold back the Watchers. And let me tell you, these guys have some badass armor. Among the notable tribes there are also the Ursine, which are shamans who worship the Volibear, the primal god of the wild who slowly turns his worshippers into twisted animalistic monstrosities. Speaking of which, yes, there are also the primal gods of Freljord. And finally, we need to talk about the Iceborn. When the Watchers tried to arrive here, they tainted the ice around them. This special ice is called the True Ice, and it is so dangerous you literally die if you touch it. However, the Watchers also tainted some people, giving them the ability to touch the ice. It is still extremely painful for them to hold a true ice weapon, but at least they can survive it. These people are known as the Iceborn. But people were not the only things that were tainted. There are also ice trolls, some of whom are also Iceborn. To be honest, these guys were made to have their own dungeon. But there are also some animals that were twisted by the Watchers. And Lissandra is even twisting some beings herself to make them serve her. So overall, Freljord is gonna have a lot of cool warriors, shamans, and horrors. So these would be the 3 regions on the main continent.
Én azt
But
mondom,
this
hogy
place is actually
valószínűleg
so big
akármennyire
it can
lesz
easily make
is
the base
szar,
world
ha
of the
szar
game.
lesz.
Especially since there are a
Valószínűleg
bunch
nem,
of smaller regions
nagyon
between
nehezen
them.
tudna
There is
deadlenni.
Nockmerch, full of
Viszont
witches, Argent
az,
Mountains
hogy
with their
ezt a
dragons,
Riot
Doggo
meghúzta, hogy egy ilyen
with void
játék, vagy egy ilyen
monsters,
stílusban csinálni a
Dalamor Plains
játékot,
with him, and so much more. But from
Én
here,
ebből
you
azt
can cleverly
mondanám,
set
hogy
up the
tudják, hogy mit
expansions
csinálnak.
because of how well everything is interconnected. So now, let's have a look at the continent to the east called Ionia. Ionia has a very close connection to Noxus. You can only guess why. It's because Noxians once tried to conquer it all during an event simply called the Invasion of Ionia. This was a horrible war full of using children as soldiers because Noxians thought Ionians wouldn't fight back against children, and chemical weapons. Lots and lots of chemical weapons. Speaking of which, remember
Biztos, hogy
Singed
ilyesmi
from
biztos, hogy
Arcane?
nem lesz, hogyha
He's the guy who chemically devastated
MMO-ban ez nem
Ionia.
szokás.
Eventually, Noxus failed, but they kept their small controlled territories.
Inkább az
So the
lesz
first
kérdés,
quest here could be simply boarding a ship, sailing over, and
hogy
exploring the place for the
mi
Noxian
lesz a
Empire.
monetizáció.
Now, when it comes to Ionia itself, the place gets mystical. Everything here is alive and connected to the spirit of nature. And I mean everything, from the animals to the people to the buildings. Everything is alive. So if you anger Mother Nature, your house can twist and strangle you in your sleep.
Köszi, bő.
So you can only imagine how Mother Nature fought against Noxians. Usually a river came alive to drown them.
Nyilván.
That's why all the buildings here look like they were woven from wood. It's because they were.
Norvég.
With nature magic, people let nature build their houses. It also means that sometimes your house can just walk away. When it comes to the NPCs here, obviously there is gonna be a lot of nature spirits. and a lot more of simply mystical animals, from giant flying tigers to the never-ending story. But be ready to also face local Ionians, blade masters, shadow cultists, murderers, and ninjas, both good, bad, and the in-between. But finally, there is also one more enemy that we could face. The furries. That's right, this race is known as the Vastaya. They are half humans and half magical animals. And yes, canonically, the species was born in exactly the way you are thinking. But to be fair, the Vastaya are quite cool and they are definitely gonna be a playable race. Just like Yordles, who also like Ionia a lot. Lastly, after Noxian's ravaged
Skyler
nature,
lehetne kis
demons
Yordle.
started occupying all the places filled with misery and doubt. So that's gonna be a nice bonus enemy. So yes, the exploration of Ionia and the raid on the Shadow Order could be a really cool first expansion. But it's definitely not Riot's only option, because we can also go south to Piltover and Zaun. These are the ones people will know about, simply because this is where Arcane took place. Piltover and Zaun are two massive cities located one above the other. And they are so massive they could easily be turned into their own playable zones. They are both focusing on futuristic technology powered up by magic of the Hextech gemstones. Using this magic, they can power up anything from guns to augmented limbs to vehicles. Visually, it is simply futuristic Victorian era. And unfortunately, there wouldn't be much of enemy variety. We would likely fight the rich houses of Piltover and their deadly assassins, with the occasional thief on the streets, corrupt wardens, and the occasional rogue steam golem. But things get a bit more interesting in the undercity known as Zaun. Zaun is the dirty underbelly covered in thick toxic smoke. Because the majority of people are poor here, they developed a cheaper alternative to Hextech called Chemtech. This artificial green
már
stuff
megint egy
can
motor.
power up cheaper limb
még egy
replacements,
motor.
as well as highly unstable weaponry.
Nem rossz.
Zaun is also controlled by the Cam
Egy
Barons,
kis
which are
kitámasztója.
obviously gonna be the main enemy here. But on the side, we may also meet some chemical mutants, unstable constructs, as well as some mass murderers and people who hunt down mass murderers. And funnily enough, at the very bottom of Zaun itself, there are the hidden ruins of an ancient city full of traps. That is obviously gonna be a cool dungeon. So yes, there is not much more that I can add here.
Amint értem, hogy mondasz, Helder, nem kell mindig mindenben egyedinek lenned, tehát nem kell azért csak azért nem csinálni valamit, mert más se azt csinálja. Így, attól ez egyedi, mert így azt csinálsz, amit így gondolsz, nem azért, mert senki nem csinálja. Jó, vicc, Helder, jó pénz.
But after the Emperor got betrayed by his best friend, the entire empire collapsed. This region is a massive desert with the occasional city near a river. In the center of the region, there is the Sun Disk.
Legalábbis én úgy jött ki, mert akkor ért rá több mindenki. Meg úgy jöttek a dolgok, hogy...
use this celestial magic to turn their best soldiers into the Ascended, also known as the Golden God Warriors.
De hát attól még
However,
most
these
én
God Warriors
mindenki.
wouldn't make a great enemy here. That's because after the Emperor had died, the Ascended started fighting for leadership.
Benne van, hogy más azért legózik,
After
mert
learning how
látta,
to
hogy
use
ez
blood magic
egy
to
működő
gain the
koncepció,
edge, they morphed their own bodies and became the Darkin.
Béna.
Twisted, blood-frenzied monsters that would certainly make really cool raid bosses. Besides this ancient evil, Shurima is also full of its own
De tényleg
animals,
többen legóznak, ez igaz.
raiders, dune scavengers, and on top of all of that, void creatures. That's because to the south, there used to be a kingdom known as Icathia that wanted to destroy the Shuriman Empire. So, they asked the Watchers for help. You can imagine how that went. The Watchers sent through some void beasts that consumed Icathia and polluted Shurima to this day. To fight back the void, Shurima does have a lot of hidden tombs around with hidden God Warrior weapons. Not to mention that Shurima also has a circle of time mages who are trying to freeze the void in time. Now, as I mentioned near the beginning of the video, even if Shurima becomes an expansion, they can still easily make Shurimans a playable race because they are already connected to Noxus. As you can see, of course, Noxians already conquered part of Shurima.
Azért
So
ez
some
nyilván-
Shurimans are fighting for Noxus.
Nyilván húzza az
Also,
egyik a
as a cool
másikat
fact,
amúgy.
for those of you who like
De ja, hát
arcane,
azért mondtam, hogy
hex
baj, hát amúgy
crystals
is úgy
are
oldal.
harvested in Shurima.
Ahogy
That's
gondolod.
why a Shuriman expansion
De
would
nyilván
be a
ez benne
great
van mindig,
follow-up
hogy
to Piltover
valaki látja,
Zone.
sokan látják, hogy ez most
Again,
jól megy,
that's why Riot
akkor
can easily
ő is azt
turn
mondja.
only
Egyébként
the
ez
northern
nyilván
continent
egy,
into the base
alapvetően
world.
egy jó modell
Anyway,
is az, hogy
going west from
megnézed, hogy mi az,
Shurima,
ami
we
most
arrive at
esetleg,
Mount
nem
Targon.
tudom,
This place
trending,
is incredibly
és akkor
unique. First of all, this
te is
mountain
csinálod.
is not
És lehet, hogy
magical.
tetszik
It
is.
was
És
literally
akkor meg
pulled up from the
dupla a
ground by
nyerés.
celestial gods. And that's because this place serves as a portal to the celestial realm, also known as Targon Prime. Now, because this mountain was
mit tudom én,
pulled up,
az Only Up
it
is
also has
trending
some
volt.
unique features. For
Megnéztem én is,
example, you may
meg
find
abból volt itt
frozen
egy csomó
lakes
hasonló
frozen
játék.
horizontally on the
Aztán be
mountain.
is jött meg.
And the very peak of the
Nyilván
mountain is special
az
too.
embereknek is,
Should
bár most
a
már nagyon
mortal
nem
reach the
mindenkinek.
peak, despite the brutal climate
Tihanynak
and the
nagyon, meg
deadly
Francisnek
wildlife,
erre. Meg ja, meg
either they
JJ-nek is
die from
tetszik, ők még
exhaustion,
néznék, de...
or the celestial gods deem them worthy and they become an ascended aspect. There is aspect of war, aspect of the sun, aspect of the moon, aspect of the twilight, aspect of the guardian, and so on. Simply said, after people reach the peak, they become some of the strongest beings on the entire planet. So of course, the mountain is full of people who worship the celestial demigods. And I speculate this is where we could get a lot of cool armor sets. There are the Solari, who are devoted to the aspect of the sun. Then there are their rivals, the Lunari, who are devoted to the aspect of the moon. But also, the tribe I assume will become a playable class, the Warriors of Rakor. Of course, besides just humans, Targon also has all sorts of furry Vastaya. Near the bottom of the mountain, you may notice that the mountain is alive. But also there are Stellarcorns, a variety of mind-bending creatures, and loads of dragons. Speaking of which, remember that this place is linked to the Celestial Realm. So this is where we may also meet the star-forging celestial dragon Aurelian Soul, as well as all sorts of other celestial beings. A lot of these would make for interesting bosses. In fact, the ascension of Mount Targon would be a really cool raid. Next, on the other side of Shurima, there is Ishtal. This is a special place
Ott
where
van
people are
Bilgewater, ott van
mastering
Francis,
the
de
elemental
látom.
magic. They are using it for everything. Fishing, smithing, walking, and this place is definitely gonna be saved for an expansion.
Hát ez a videó, ez
Basically,
11
remember when
hónapos,
Ikafian asked
de nem
the
hiszem, hogy
Watchers
bárhol
for
lenne
help? And
gameplay.
then that happened. Ishtal was their neighbor, and after they saw the Void devour an entire kingdom, they believed the Void would soon devour the entire world. So, using their elemental magic, Ishtal built massive walls of plants
Hogyha lesz
around their entire
bővebb
region,
információ,
isolating themselves from
hát
the
arról
rest of
mindenki
the
tudni fog.
world. For
Valószínűleg.
3,500 years, Ishtal stayed isolated, believing that the world outside of their walls was devoured by the Void. But now, very recently, some mages found out that the world outside is completely fine. So now, the Ishtali mages are slowly revealing themselves. To be honest, Ishtal is the most underdeveloped region in Runeterra. We know the region has a lot of hunting Vastaya, deadly plants and some elemental dragons, but most of the region is still a mystery to us. So at least here, Riot will have the
Tehát
freedom
akkor
to trust.
az is lehet, hogy semmi nem lett belőle.
But now, we
Ja.
leave the main continent to visit the last two regions. First of all,
Bilgewater.
there is Bilgewater. If you like pirate adventures, this is gonna be your place. This is where we are going to explore inns and gambling dens, even some local temples worshipping the god of motion, Nagake Boros.
Na, amit van, András,
Here we
azért
are
mondom,
going to
hogy
fight pirates and sea monsters,
hogy még az is lehet, hogy
sea witches,
megsérel, az is lehet, hogy nem is
sea
lesz.
Vastaya, maybe some demons. And possibly we'll side with Sarah Fortune to fight the king of the pirates, Gangplank. But there's a lot more here. Last year, Riot released their RPG, which was set in Bilgewater. So not only can we already explore this place in detail, but it even has a monster.
Ja, azt előtt tudom elképzelni, hogy
And
elkasszálják, mint hogy
you can
megjelenik és
already
dead.
see some really cool bosses too. However, this place is also linked to the last place I want to show you today, the Shadow Isles. See, every year the horrors of the Shadow Isles lurk out, and Bilgewater just happens to be the closest place. So every year, Bilgewater is fighting the undead. Once upon a time, the Shadow Isles used to be the Blessed Isles, a rich place full of advanced magic. Long story short, there was a young asshole king who wanted to revive his dead queen, and in the process he accidentally released dark necromantic magic. This magic destroyed the island and made it home for undeath. In the lore, this event is called the Ruination, and because the RPG is called The Ruined King, it may not be a surprise to you that you also get to explore the Shadow Isles there. And there they have everything you can imagine. Undead horrors creeping everywhere. And should we ever venture into these islands, I have no idea whom we're going to fight. The Ruined King who caused all of this is banished elsewhere. Thresh, who siphoned his magic after he was banished, also left the Isles. And even Hecarim, the most brutal soldier of them all, is currently around Demacia. So the Shadow Isles don't currently have a main baddie. So this is where Riot could push forward some of the side characters. Now, even though these have all been the regions that are currently set up on Runeterra, Riot has already confirmed that there is a new continent further to the east. Currently, it is planned to be revealed in the upcoming Ruination novel. And so far, we know that this new continent is where the ruined King Viego is from. And this is also where he was banished at the end of his story. All we know about that place is that it is quite mystical. There are yet more dragons here, and in fact, Kamavor, which is the Ruined King's nation, has a lot of draconic armor. So should Riot run out of places to explore, don't worry, they can always make more. But that's all I wanted to show you today. As someone who's been following the lore of League of Legends from the very beginning, I can tell you, I'm very confident the setting of Riot's MMO is gonna be great. Their incredible writers have been preparing the world for years now. And now, it's time to harvest the fruit. If you like this video, let me know in the comments below. Because right now, I still have 3 more topics that I could talk about in regards to the MMO.
Ez még azért messze volt ez a
raid bosses we can face,
ez arassuk le gyümölcsöt.
Classes we could play. And as someone who has collected an unholy amount of transmog, I would love to show you all the cool armor sets this universe has. But that's it for this video. See you in 6 to 8 years when the MMO gets released.
Na igen, ez a lényeg.
See you in 6 to 8 years when the MMO gets released. To 8 years this video. See you in 6 to 8 years when the MMO gets released.
Ja, akkor már csak 5 vagy 7 év múlva. Ha. Ja, nem talál ki semmit. Mit tudom én? Azt mondták sokan, amikor még úgy volt, hogy ez már megtörténik, aztán utána kiderült, hogy mégse. Addig, amíg nem tudtuk, hogy mégse, vagy még nem biztos, akkor azt mondta mindenki, hogy hát majd most a Microsoft az milyen jót csinál ebből a Blizzardból, ami konkrétan egy szar lett az Activision miatt. Úgyhogy ennyi, nem tudom. Ennyi, ja. Hát, ha majd itt a Microsoft az majd csinál itt valamit a Blizzard, de aztán végül még az is lehet, hogy jók lesznek a dolgok. Amúgy a Diablo 4-el sincsen baj, csak nem tudom. Majd a 11-ben azért valószínűleg azért sokan rájönnek, hogy ez így nekik kevés.
azok valószínűleg majd poéznak. Pol 2. De sok mindenkinek ez szerintem jó lesz, mármint már most is az, a Diablo 4, és így. Meg hát alapvetően már most tudjuk, hogy mennyire sikeres volt. Úgyhogy ja. Ja, ennyi. Ja. Na jó van, akkor viszont szerintem én meg megyek, azt én is megszereztetem a magamat, meg a szobát, meg minden. Micsoda, fél fokkal hűvösebb van. Na jó van, keresetnétek egy raidet. Aztán majd re. Egy kis only appa. Na re, majd